have been married to my husband Kevin for 5 years. We have a 3-year-old daughter, and I'm currently pregnant with twins. My brother-in-law Terrence has been married to his wife Jess for 7 years. Jess and I are total opposites. Jess is an extrovert, kind of loud, boisterous, and some would even say abrasive. I'm an introvert. I'm not quiet or shy, but I am reserved and very observant. The first time I met Jess, I told Kevin that we would be like oil and water. We've never been overtly hostile towards each other, but also have never gone out of our way to bond. Unfortunately, Terrence and Jess had fertility issues for several years before finally having their son a couple of weeks ago. Prior to this, Jess was very odd towards us when I was pregnant with our daughter. The best way to describe it is hot and cold. 1 minute, she pretended like she didn't care while we were talking about it at family gatherings. The next, she was volunteering to throw the baby shower. I gave a firm no to that. We both assumed the behavior was because of their fertility issues and didn't think too much of it. But the strangest thing she did was almost demand to know what we were naming our daughter before we announced it. She asked us constantly after our gender reveal and got visibly annoyed when we just laughed her off and said it was a secret. We couldn't understand why she cared so much, as she was not expecting at this time. Regardless, we didn't share the name with anyone. When our daughter was born and her name was finally announced, Jess was kind of obsessed with it. She just kept going on and on about how beautiful and unique it was. To this day, she comments about how different it is. The name we chose is a pretty common Welsh name, which wouldn't be all that different, except for the fact that we are African American. I've always gravitated towards names from different regions and fell in love with the name years ago and never shared it with anyone prior to Kevin. Fast forward to both of us being pregnant at the same time. Jess's odd behavior continued towards me, but this time it was more blatant. Snarky comments under the guise of jokes about how big I was going to get with 2 babies, and that my body would never snap back like it did after our daughter. She even accused us of getting pregnant on purpose after she announced her own pregnancy, even though the whole family knew we were actively trying, and at the time of her announcement, I was already a few weeks along and didn't know. One thing about me, introvert or not, I'm no pushover and will stand up for myself. But I chose to ignore Jess because I knew that would get to her more than confronting her would, since she seems to thrive off drama. Jess was obviously much further along than we are. However, we did have our gender reveal prior to Jess giving birth. And right on cue, the baby name interrogation started again. Because they decided not to find out the gender of their baby in advance, Jess kept hounding us for both of the names we had already picked out. But again, we declined to answer. After days of this, I got annoyed and asked Kevin if he thought the reason for her insistence was so she could use the name first since she was due first. He kind of chuckled until he realized I was serious and said he didn't think so, but that anything was possible. So I said, let's test it. We were due to host my father-in-law's birthday at our house a couple weeks later, and I decided to leave something in the unfinished nursery with a girl and boy name on it and see if Jess went snooping. Because Kevin thought it was silly, he said he would give me $20 if she did it. So I went onto some site where you can order custom name wall decals and put in the names Aria Rose and Sebastian Ali. These are names that we like, but aren't remotely close to what we chose. This will also be our last pregnancy, so even if Jess did use them, we wouldn't care. I didn't complete the order. I got to the final page and then printed it out and hid it in a dresser drawer in the nursery. The party goes off, but because we were busy hosting, we never noticed if Jess disappeared for any extended period of time. When I went into the nursery the next morning, nothing was out of place and the order sheet was still in the exact location. So we both just went, "Welp," and forgot about it. I did, however, notice that Jess never asked us about the names again. Then Jess gives birth. We went to the hospital to give our congrats. When we go in and see the baby, I asked what his name was, and man, I cannot properly explain the grin that came over Jess's face as she says Sebastian Ali. I mean, she was really proud of herself, and honestly, it's the most vindictive I have ever seen her look in the years I've known her. But instead of reacting how she was expecting, I put on a performance like I had graduated from Juilliard. That's such a great name. He's so cute. Look at his whittle face. Oh, I just love him so much. Welcome to the world, Sebastian. Auntie is going to spoil you rotten. I mean, I am laying it on thick without an ounce of bother. The range of emotions on Jess's face went from shock to confusion to rage in a span of maybe 17 seconds. Meanwhile, my husband is holding in the laugh of the century. We later say our goodbyes, and he gives me a 20 in the elevator while almost crying laughing. All I could say was, like I thought, this was 2 weeks ago, and we haven't seen them since because we wanted to give them time to settle in with the new baby. I have heard from my mother-in-law that Jess doesn't seem as thrilled about motherhood as she thought she would be, considering how long it took them to conceive, but said it might just be baby blues. Obviously, I think she's just disappointed that her petty move didn't have the desired effect on us. I did share this with my sister, and while she laughed initially, she did say it was kind of an AH move. So am I the AH? Now for a few comments. One commenter said, NTA. That's hilarious. Put sister-in-law on an information diet about anything having to do with your pregnancy and kids. Sister-in-law probably isn't done trying to cause drama. Then OP replied, I am more concerned about this now. Before her pregnancy, her and brother-in-law lived in another state for years. That's why it was so easy for me to ignore her. They moved back here in May, and it's become harder to dodge her. Another commenter said, NTA. She tricked herself into naming her baby a name she probably doesn't even like. OP responded, this is what I am starting to feel a little bit bad about. The kid deserved a name of his own, not something thrust onto him because his mother wanted to be spiteful. To a deleted comment, OP said, that's what I think now also. Meanwhile, the actual reason we don't announce names beforehand isn't because we're worried about them being stolen, but because we don't want people's unsolicited opinions. I definitely think if she had learned our daughter's name early, she would have told us it was stupid and tried to talk us out of it. Now for the post. Hey y'all, thanks for the responses to my original post. The comments were funnier than I was expecting and kept me and my husband pretty entertained. I tried to respond to as many as I could before they got away from me. I've gotten some messages asking for an update, but nothing major has really happened. Jess didn't break into my house to push me down the steps and steal my kid, lol. I did get some additional info, though, that I can pass along. Before I get to that, I want to give a little context about my relationship with Jess to explain why I did what I did. To put it plainly, Jess and I have been in a one-sided beef since the day Kevin and I started dating. I give her zero thought if I don't have to, and yet I live rent-free in her mind. Based on snide comments she's made over the years, the reason why is jealousy. Kevin and I dated for only a year before we got engaged. We then were married within 6 months of that engagement. We had an actual wedding with a ceremony and reception, went on a honeymoon, bought a house in the burbs, and got pregnant in rapid succession. Both of us have good careers and are financially stable. Mother-in-law, father-in-law, and Gmail all adore me. Jess and Terrence did not have a similar path. They had been on and off since they were 19-20, with Terrence never really wanting to commit. During one of their breaks, Terrence got a FWB pregnant and now has an 11-year-old son. This has always been a sore subject with Jess due to her fertility struggles, fibroids. When they finally got back together, she pressed him for marriage until he relented and gave her a shut-up ring. They went to the courthouse on a random Tuesday, then had dinner at Red Lobster afterward, and went back to work the next day. Not trying to be shady, just relaying the facts. They now live in a male 2-bedroom apartment in a high-cost-of-living city while working hourly jobs. They aren't minimum wage or anything, but constantly need overtime to make ends meet. This has led her to resent me over the years. She thinks everything has come easily to me and has let that fester. There was a time a few years ago at a gathering where she got drunk and got into an argument with Terrence. I think her attitude that night stemmed from seeing me with my infant daughter. To hurt him, she blurted out that she married the wrong brother. Everyone was shocked. I wasn't. She just said the quiet part out loud and revealed what I already knew. So I poked her a little and said, "Really, which one? That's kind of gross since both were minors when you met them." Context. Kevin and Terrence also have a younger brother, Tim, 28. Boy, did she fly off the handle after that lol. To this day, she claims to have no memory of that night. Anyway, now I know there is a new reason why she resents me. The update. Like I said, nothing has really happened since I last posted. I haven't seen or heard from Jess since that day in the hospital. Terrence also hasn't communicated much with Kevin other than sports talk. However, my mother-in-law has been with them almost every day. She came over yesterday to go over some last-minute things for our baby shower that we are having the Saturday after Halloween. I am not due till late January, but with the holidays and twins tending to arrive early, we just wanted to get it out of the way. Anyway, after finalizing some things, I asked mother-in-law how Terrence and Jess were doing. She sighed and leaned back in her chair and said, "Girl, it's a mess." She goes on a long word vomit that I will have to summarize. Basically, they've been at it since before the baby was born. When they were discussing names, Jess's list only consisted of girl names. When Terrence asked what if it's a boy, Jess was adamant that it wouldn't be, but if it was, they would just use Terrence Jr. This caused an argument because Terrence's 11-year-old is not named after him, and it would be petty to name the second son a junior. Unbeknownst to me, Jess was having severe anxiety over not the name, but the gender of their baby. So much so that she refused to find out early because she was afraid of disappointment, and she wanted to enjoy her pregnancy believing she was having a girl. She really wanted a girl. I mean, really wanted a girl. This goes back to mother-in-law, in my opinion. Mother-in-law is the only girl of 4 brothers. She had 3 boys. 2 of her 3 boys, Tim has a 6-year-old, have boys. Then my daughter came along. Mother-in-law actually broke down in tears at our gender reveal. Since the day she was born, mother-in-law has become a little obsessed with her lol. Not in a JMIL way. She knows and respects boundaries, but the whole family is aware that my daughter is MIL's favorite person in the world. I think Jess thought that by having a girl, she would get that same attention and affection from mother-in-law, as she has never been Jess's biggest fan. When that didn't happen, something short-circuited in her head. MIL's words, not mine. Before we arrived at the hospital that day, they were still fighting over a name. So I guess when I showed up, she just blurted it out. While I still think it was to hurt me, it seems like it was also because she didn't allow herself to think of anything else, because she didn't want a boy. I said in the first post how I noticed her expression. However, I completely failed to notice Terrence's. He was pissed. Jess had never mentioned that name to him prior, and he had no clue where it even came from. He also hated it. He refused to sign off on that, and they left the hospital without a name. In our state, you only have 7 days from birth to register a name. She eventually told Terrence to pick the name himself and that she didn't care anymore, so he did. He swapped out Sebastian for Jordan, but kept Ali. Yes, after Michael and Muhammad lol. According to mother-in-law, since they've been home, Jess has shut down emotionally. She's been doing all the motherly things, but there's a disconnect there. Mother-in-law said she finally broke down to her a few nights ago that she'll likely never have a daughter due to her age and what it took to get pregnant in the first place. I think that will bring them closer together, since mother-in-law never got the daughter she wanted either. I also felt bad hearing that, because regardless of how I feel about her as a person, I do have a heart and would never want to punch down on her if she's in the throes of PPD. Jess still hasn't admitted to snooping, so I haven't admitted to setting her up. A few comments said I should never confess, but I think I will at some point, mainly because I don't care lol. I am more than willing to burn a bridge while I am still standing on it, but now simply isn't the time. So that's it. That's the lackluster update. Jess is invited to my baby shower, so I might be back in a couple of weeks, depending on how that shakes out. Now for a few comments. One commenter said, "Well, damn, that's not where I saw this going. Might not have been crazy as you say, but definitely quite the revelation." I feel for Jess to a point, but the minute she made that comment about my husband, all gloves would have been off. Your restraint is commendable, lol. I hope she gets counseling so that that little boy doesn't have to grow up knowing his mother didn't want him. P.S. Absolutely don't listen to the person who said to go out of your way to be nice to her. This site is full of willing doormats, and I'm actually quite sick of it. I am mostly worried about my nephew in all of this, but I really do think mother-in-law will step up and help. I don't know if I can, or what that would even look like. We've never been close before this, and likely never will. The best way for me to help is actually to just leave her be. Every mama deserves a village, and had she shown me the slightest bit of kindness in all these years, I would be a part of that. Yet here we are. Now for some comments. A commenter said, I actually feel bad for your sister-in-law. I know she has her faults, and she is projecting her hate onto you unfairly, but it seems like she just wants to feel wanted, which is sad. I wouldn't admit to it, even though in the last post I said you totally should, to be petty. Her life just seems sad. I bet she didn't see herself with a man who didn't want to be with her, and her feeling so unwanted at this stage in life. My thoughts, exactly. Because 90% of this dynamic was in place before I arrived, I never took it into consideration. I just judged her based on how she's treated me in the last 6 to 7 years. Whether or not that's fair is debatable, but there's almost 20 years of history here that I probably should have considered. Another commenter said, there is no reason to ever tell anyone else about the name game. What would be the point? There's enough bad blood between the two of you, and exposing it would not bring anything positive to anyone's life. It would be petty. The temporary high would be beneath you. I think if no one asks, then I won't tell, but if confronted with it, I'm not going to lie. The commenter asked, but how confronted? Only you and your husband know about the setting. Who is to confront you about it, Jess? If she ever asks me about the names and why I didn't use them, I'll tell her. But for her to do that, she would first have to admit her part, so it's unlikely. Then another commenter said, that was not lackluster. The villain origin story for Jess was actually quite relevant, and her ongoing jealousy toward your good fortune is rather sad. So for her to initiate, as you said, a one-sided beef is beyond wild. Stealing a baby name to make you angry? Nice try, honey. I don't blame you for telling her about the setup. She's trifling. Still not the idiot. I read my fair share of Reddit stories, and they always go off the rails, so I thought this would be boring in comparison, lol. However, I also recognize that most of those stories are fake. Another commenter added, to me it sounds odd that mother-in-law likes her female grandchildren more than the male one. We know who the golden child will be. Sounds quite immature. It was a little odd to me at first, also simply because my daughter isn't the first grandchild or granddaughter on my side, so I didn't understand mother-in-law's big fuss. But I understand it a bit more now. My husband and Terrence are only 3 years apart. However, my husband and Tim are 7 years apart. Tim was my IL's last Hail Mary at having a girl, and it didn't work out. She's probably held on to that disappointment longer than she should have. Am I the idiot for realizing my mother's love was conditional after watching Barbie and calling her out on it? I watched the Barbie movie with my mom and realized the lack of love she had for me. I saw it make its way to TikTok and decided to update. First, I want to thank everyone who commented. I really only got a few negative comments, which to me was surprising, but even those I appreciated. Now to the update. It's actually a happy update. In October of last year, and my grandmother, who I mentioned, passed away. And I joke with friends how her passing restored peace to the land, lol. She was a pretty awful person, so it's okay if you laugh at that. During the aftermath of that, my mom and I became a team to take care of my grandpa, and it started to heal us. Now for a few comments. One commenter asked about her mother's love language and affection toward her. OP responded, I hope no one downvotes you. But yes, there are things good she's done. Unfortunately, basically none of them came with no strings. There's always a catch, with every single person beyond me. It's also gotten worse as I've aged because of my ability and courage to push back. Things that she felt before she could just dismiss and tell me I'm wrong was not something that I'd believe. She used to be able to yell at me to get me to react, and then it'll flip to, I'm unreasonable. I don't yell anymore. and it messes with her. I will always remember the nice things she's done when I choose to think of her, but I won't forget what price was paid for those nice things and what it cost me. Another commenter asked about her grandma's affection on the daughter relationship. OP said, gee, yes, my grandmother is worse than my mom, and I get that. I've also watched my mom do the same thing I do, kind of, growing up, and I think that is what hurts me the most. Is she knows how this shoot is, and she repeats patterns. I've begged her along with my entire family to seek therapy, because I truly believe if she did, while painful to deal with not only the insane childhood she had, but the realization she did it to her children, I think it would heal our entire family. She refuses. I can't tell you how many times she's gone to 1, maybe 2 sessions with people before an excuse is made. Last time was, I know more than her, she can't help me. Then, another commenter asked about the way her mother behaves toward her and her siblings. OP replied, 1000% in my post, I said I know why she is the way she is, but I and most of my siblings have begged her to seek therapy to deal with her childhood, and in turn, with how she raised us. Unfortunately, that's just too hard for her. And my grandmother is not capable of love whatsoever, to the point it's diagnosed attachment disorder, and I believe my mom's inability to love as someone should is a result of her raising. There comes a point, though, that if you refuse to seek the help to be better, then people will leave. I will always love my mother, but it's not fair for me to get hurt over and over because she can't handle her feelings. It's only gotten worse as I've become an adult, because I have done therapy, and she sees how much I've grown. I also believe she knows it's coming. She knows once I leave, I won't be back. We got into it about a month ago, and I've just kept my distance. She asked what I wanted in a fit of rage over the topic of the argument, and I just said, I want my mom to care. I don't need you to fix anything, but there are freaking reasons you know nothing about my life. I'm either completely ignored while you all state, she's got it. She's been in therapy. She has tools to, are you sure you actually feel this way because you're disorder XYZ, and I can't do it anymore. I think in that moment she realized that our relationship is unrepairable. She's been nice to me since, but she's also kept her distance. What I wish, though, is that she seeks therapy. She does the work, not for me, but for herself, because she's still only human and deserves to be healthy and have healthy relationships. But even if she does this, our relationship will never be fixed. I ended up in treatment for ED in December of last year. My ED was rough, but because I'm fat, I was worried she wouldn't believe the struggles. My mother was the one person I was afraid wouldn't support me, but she actually was the biggest supporter I had. I was gone for 3 months in a city about an hour and a half away, staying in a condo near the place I did treatment. She called me every other day just to check in. She helped financially since I was out of work during that time. She never once made me feel bad or that I was faking, which she had done in my teens and early 20s. When I came home, she continued that. She went to therapy for the first time on her own. We finally talked about everything. I brought up the movie and my reaction. She understood and apologized about her treatment of me. And beyond the words, she continues to make efforts. She still asks me how my food relationship is. She makes sure I'm taking care of myself, and she tells me she loves me and is proud of me a lot. Things have also changed in terms of her other kids, my siblings, and my dad and stepmom, and it's something we all appreciate. She's trying. While it's not perfect, I still will forever be closer to my stepmom, her wife, but I feel like I can talk to my mom about things I never could before. So honestly, my grandmother dying really did restore peace to our family. Now for a relevant comment. Commenter 1. It's really nice to hear when people acknowledge their problems and then work on them. It brings hope to the world. Also, a reminder that even the most unexpected of people can change in unexpected ways. Then OP replied, exactly. It truly wasn't something I thought would happen, but I'm glad it did. I have a huge blended family, and had I cut her off completely, had she not done change, I would have lost pretty much everyone. Am I the idiot for calling the cops on my neighbor's guest who turned her life into a nightmare? I live in a semi-detached house that's been split into 2 flats. I live in the upstairs one, and my neighbor, an elderly woman in her mid-80s, lives in the downstairs one. We're sort of loose friends acquaintances. I take her to bridge nights every so often and do her shopping. And she lets me use her garden when the weather's nicer, or lets me get some food shopping on her card. Every so often, I do a bit of baking and like to take her a bit, like a slice of cake, for example. At the end of September, when I went downstairs, an older man came to the door. I had never seen this bloke before. He was probably in his 60s, not middle-aged, but not her age, if you get what I mean, and dressed a bit weird in a blazer and tie. He was very aggressive and asked what I wanted. I said I was here to see my neighbor, and he said in this weird faux posh accent, "Miss XYZ is not taking visitors right now," but took the cake and slammed the door in my face. Really weird, but I assumed it was her son or something. I know she has kids, but they're not in the picture. Ever since then, things have gotten weird. I've only seen my neighbor twice, once when she was in the garden with him, and once being bundled off into a car very late at night before coming back in the early hours of the morning. Both times she looked very uncomfortable. Over the last couple of weeks, I've noticed the curtains are always shut, and her garden is getting overgrown and untidy. Some nights there's shouting. I can hear a male and female voice, but it's not hers. And a few times I've seen a Filipino woman coming to and from the property. Whenever I've encountered the man, when leaving the house, more or less, or seen him leaving the property, he's either blanked me or gotten very aggressive when I try to speak to him. I once asked if my neighbor was okay, and he threatened to contact the neighborhood watch. I did contact the police on 101, and they were trying to fob me off and sort of implying because it's an older bloke and not obviously related to county lines, they're not really interested. More or less got told it's probably just her boyfriend, and I should stop being nosy. I'm really concerned for my neighbor. So is there any way I can get the police interested or maybe contact someone at the council? Thank you. Now for a few important comments. A commenter suggested trying adult social services at the local council, noting that even if there isn't enough evidence of a crime for the police to investigate at this stage, the way she is being isolated is a warning sign for elder abuse. I responded that something feels very off about all this and that I'll give them a call. Plus, that MASH team another poster mentioned. Another commenter asked if she receives any home visits from community nurses or carers, suggesting that if she does, I could contact them to explain my concerns. I replied that not that I know of. There was a physio lady coming every so often, but the last she was around was in August. I don't know if that was just the end of her time or if it had to do with this. Unfortunately, me and Bridge friends were basically the only people she interacted with. A couple of them did come to the house, but the man threatened to report them to the NW and chase them off. Now for the 1 week update. You might remember the post I made the other week about my neighbor being cuckooed. The short answer is she was, though probably not for the reasons any of us expected. Okay, so what happened after the post? The next day I contacted the council's MASH team as advised, and they were extremely helpful. They were immediately concerned and said they'd be sending someone to check on her. They also asked if I could keep a diary of any events, as they'd like to speak to me when they do arrive, and I said I'll make a log of whatever happens. So the week goes by, and more weird stuff happens. It was all quiet, and then on Halloween, a group of older gentlemen came to the property, and then some women, who I assumed were strippers, showed up before leaving a few minutes later, screaming at the man who's in the flat. He kept threatening to report them to the NW and was waving around this insect spray. Anytime any trick-or-treaters came by, they'd get the same response. It was really weird. On Friday night, I saw my neighbor getting bundled into a minicab, and then she returned early hours of Sunday in a different minicab with the old bloke screaming at the driver before he rushed her inside. Again, all really weird. Anyway, yesterday, 2 social workers arrived and talked to me. I showed them everything I've written, and they agreed this looks very much like cuckooing, but they weren't sure why this old bloke was doing it or what he was doing with the property. Now, I wasn't there for the initial confrontation, but I know they went down to speak to him, and he immediately went on the usual spiel. I'm going to report you to the NW, get off my property, etc. When they weren't going, he sprayed them in the eyes with something and slammed the door shut. Police and ambulance were called, and I helped them wash their eyes out. From what I could hear when the police arrived, he tried the same thing with them, the spraying, not the NW. But it sounded like they tackled him, and he got hauled away in cuffs. Police found my neighbor in the property, padlocked in the box room before she got taken to the hospital. We did get into the property later, and for the most part, it was how it had been left. But every door, and I mean every door, had a padlock on it. I did speak to my neighbor in the hospital. Her kids are coming down, and she explained to me she met the man at her bridge club, where he claimed he was in the parachute regiment, but was now down on his luck and asked if he could stay with her for a night or two. Unfortunately, she agreed. Apparently, the first evening was fine, but the next day, the moment she goes into the toilet, he attaches a padlock to it and locks her in. That's when the abuse started. During the time he was living there, he apparently tried to take control of the flat and her bank accounts with the goal of chucking her out, and would get angry and scream at her when she didn't give in, but she refused to respond to him. She didn't really want to say much, but said he told people she was his cleaner, and the cars in the middle of the night were taxis taking her to hotels all across the region to try and get rid of her. I had to leave after that, but she said one day he had one of his little parties, and the flat was fine apart from the fact someone had smeared their she on the wall. As for the bloke, no idea what happened, and we've had all the locks changed, though we have suspicion he'll attempt to return. One night, I heard someone try the handle to the front door. My neighbor's going to go stay with my sister when she's discharged, and some of my bigger mates from Warhammer have offered to stay downstairs just in case, but we'll see. Thank you all for your assistance. You were all amazing. I showed her all the comments, and she was so blown away by the support, so a huge thank you from us both. Now for a few important comments. Commenter 1, well done for looking out for her. Very glad to read this update. Commenter 2, you are an angel of a human being for doing this. What a bizarre and messed up situation. So happy to read it's ended positively. I hope your neighbor gets plenty of support. That sounds extremely traumatic, especially for a vulnerable old lady. Very good of you to care and step up. Pleased to hear things are being resolved.